Episode number 355, How to Lead Your Church Sound Team with James Attaway. Let's do it.
This is the definitive podcast for helping you plan, create, and execute dynamic worship experiences at your church. Useful, practical content in the areas of production, worship, communications, first impressions, and more. This is Making Sunday Happen.
Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. Hope you're having a great summer. You know, summer is usually a time in church world where we get to catch our breath just a little bit. People go on vacations, and it's just the nature of the church calendar. So I hope you are getting some much deserved rest, maybe a little vacation this summer. So we have a lot of audio listeners to our podcast that listen to us on drives or on vacation or while they're setting up lyrics on Sunday. You know I'm talking to you. Today on the podcast, I will be talking with church audio master James Attaway. James is a church sound tech. He's a YouTuber. He has extensive experience with audio and mixing, training volunteers in this area, and more. We're going to be talking about how to lead your church sound team, the uphill battle audio techs face, how to cast vision and direction to your sound team, and more. We'll also play a game of 5 questions where I'll ask James his biggest pet peeve when it comes to an audio mix in church. That's all coming up.
If you're like a lot of sound techs and worship leaders, learning EQ and compression can be really challenging because there are so many options and so many suggestions out there on do this and do that, but none of those take into account what your input actually sounds like. That's why I created the Live Mixing Field Guide. It's a wire-bound book that you can keep at your soundboard so that you can get suggestions on starting places and what to listen for with your EQ, compression, and even input notes so that you can get things sounding right at the source. Also included is a free online mini course, so even if you're brand new to EQ or compression, or somebody you're training is, you can get them up to speed and put your field guide to great use right away. Take your sound team beyond just pushing faders and learn to master all the tools on your soundboard. You can get your copy at livemixingfieldguide.com. Again, that's livemixingfieldguide.com.
Hey guys, today I welcome James Attaway from Attaway Audio. James, welcome, man. Thanks so much for being here, dude.
Hey, you bet. Glad to be here.
Man, you got your lighting, your studio, your sound, top notch, brother. I am impressed.
Oh, thank you. I've made a couple YouTube videos and figured out how to be in focus over the last few years. So
yeah.
It's a good thing.
You have, man. Well, speaking of that, tell me a little bit about what God has done with you lately. Where have you served? What's some of your experience?
Yeah, so I started on the worship team in high school, and I really enjoyed just having worship nights with my friends. We would sit around for a couple hours on a Friday night just playing worship songs. And we were on the worship team, so we already knew the songs, but it was just enjoyable to worship the Lord together, as, recreation. So I was on the worship team in high school. I played bass, so I had a lot of opportunities to play. I played guitar and led some as well. But then in college, I got into audio, and that's when I discovered the International House of Prayer in Kansas City. And I was fascinated by the fact that they had worship teams that went around the clock. They're great musicians, and they knew the word, they sang the word, and they could flow spontaneously and, move from song to song. And I was just enamored by that. So after college, I joined staff at the International House of Prayer as a full-time intercessory missionary. So I got to spend time in the prayer room, worshiping, spending time in intercession and going deep in the word and doing that with worship teams as well. And I also got to serve a lot on the audio side as well. So with 24-hour schedule, there's a lot of worship teams and a lot of audio needs. So in the earlier days, you were blessed to have a warm body behind the soundboard. And things were, mostly terrible. So there was a lot of room for growth. I'll say it that way.
Yeah.
And so sewing into sound techs in that environment, training people, I got to reap the benefits of having, an easier time not being distracted by the audio during my prayer time, by sewing into other sound techs. So I had a a training program through the International House of Prayer University. And then I served as the chief engineer for the recording studio for several years as well. So I spent a lot of time training sound techs and really understood that when they understood the basics, when you mastered the foundations of these skills of mixing, things were really easy, and it was a lot easier to adapt to different singers, different worship leaders, different musicians, instead of I have one trick that I do every time on this, and that's the only thing. When they really understood, this is how you approach EQ and compression and how the balance plays into the mix, and, managing your dynamics so things don't get too loud when the band goes up. All of that made for much more enjoyable worship times in the prayer room. So I did that for 10 years full time, and then another 2 years part time while I was starting Attaway Audio to train church sound techs at large.
Yeah.
I wanted to be able to be a regular congregant on Sunday morning, go to a church and, be there with my family, but also still use my gifts and calling to serve church sound techs and sow into the audio community for churches around the world.
Yeah. Do you know Justin Rizzo?
I do.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah. So I got to, I interviewed him a few weeks ago and got to hang out with him. What a great guy. And learned a lot about IHOP and just kind of the, around the clock worship there. And so what a great ministry that is. Definitely. Awesome. So you kind of moved into starting Attaway Audio. When did that start for you? How long have you been doing that? And you've been cranking a serious YouTube channel with that too, right?
Yeah. So I published my first video in January of 2019. And it's funny, my first video that's out of focus has probably the most views of all of them. Just because it was a topic that, everybody wants to hear about, and the drum sounded good to begin with. So my drum EQ video was the first one that I launched. And then I've been trying to publish every week since then, focusing on videos that are going to help church sound techs make great decisions, because with, technology improving and making things cheaper, you can't just blame, the sound gear at church anymore for having bad sound. It's the user that makes the biggest difference.
Right.
So it's, a lot of very simple tips and tricks, things that I've refined over my years of mixing and training other people, and, hearing many, many different singers and many different drummers and guitar players and bass players, things that work across a wide array of instruments and inputs. I kind of distill all that down and put those into the videos, as well as stuff that helps church sound techs understand what their calling is. Because we can see worship leaders in the Bible with David. We can see preachers in the Bible with Paul and Peter, but we don't see sound techs in the Bible. So I unpack part of that and how the sound tech role really, it has biblical foundations and helps, sound techs connect with, this really is a spiritual job, not just a technical job that has to get done.
Yeah. Well, you've done a lot of content in just 2 or 3 years, and it's been incredible. I've scoured through your YouTube channel. It's just amazing content for church techs. And I want to use that and also some of the other content that you've put out to talk about leading your church sound team. And we're all about helping with the worship experience. And so let me ask you kind of an overarching question. How important is audio and how things sound in the room? Yes, we can go acoustic. Yes, we can go unplugged. But but in order for a lot of people to hear it clearly, audio is a big component of the worship experience. So how important is audio to the experience?
Well, in my eye, the audio system, the tech, the gear, all of that is like a bridge between what the leadership team wants to do on one side of a cliff and then where the congregation is and needs to be led on the other side. So the stronger you have that bridge, the more you can do, not just as far as reach with the number of people that you can reach or how many people can hear clearly, but also the emotional palette that you have. Because when you can have a sound system that's clear, it's distraction free. You can have parts of the service that are very quiet and contemplative. And then you can also go to loud places. If you can have that broad emotional palette that you can do with the sound system, that's going to enable your leadership team, your worship team, to go to those your creative places where we can lead the human heart, right? We can take our congregation places that they might not have gone otherwise if we just had a bullhorn standing at the front or an acoustic guitar going through an amp. There's a lot that we can do that we couldn't do without the sound system. And the other thing that it does is it just removes distractions, right? If we simplified it to like the bare bones essentials, there would be a lot of things that our very distracted culture would latch onto. And, the squirrel mentality of like, what's going on over there? How's that working? The more you can streamline your processes and make the sound system itself kind of invisible so that nobody knows that there's a sound system there. I mean, they have it in the back of their mind, but they just see the leadership team, the worship team on stage leading them, and they can follow it. So the philosophy behind what we do is really just facilitating so that leaders can lead.
So one thing that you're really big on is casting vision, which I am too, especially when it comes to your volunteer teams, making sure that they know the why behind why they're there. So tell me the importance of casting vision to your church sound team in particular.
Yeah, the church sound can be kind of a minefield of opinions, right? Because the guitar player and the bass player and the drummer and the worship leader and the singer and 5 of the congregants that have strong opinions have a different idea of how it should sound. So when you have a clear vision and clear boundaries from the leadership team of saying, hey, this is who we're serving and where we're going, this is how we're going to set guidelines on how we want it to sound. And you can avoid micromanaging your team by setting up these guidelines and these kind of output requirements, right? What do we want the mix to accomplish? What does the level of the mix need to be at in order for us to lead the people that we're called to lead well? And that's going to look different than the church down the street or the big church that you might see at a conference. You've got to know what your boundaries are. And then that eliminates so much friction between somebody's opinion, right? Because I might like it a certain way, and I might listen to metal music, on my way to church, but that doesn't mean that my drums need to sound that way when I get to church, right? So by having a clear vision, you're calling people to an attitude of humility, of service, of saying, you can lay down your personal preference to serve the congregation, and we're clear on what that is, because people don't really mind change as much as they mind ambiguity, right? If it's not clear what the expectations are, things get messy really quickly. So having a clear and almost concrete, a lot of these ideas are abstract, right? You can't quantify the feeling of, can people hear themselves sing or not? But you can kind of go and experience that and know whether or not you're hitting the mark. When all that is clear, it gets a lot easier to lead a team of volunteers that come from diverse backgrounds. So setting out those guidelines really, really helps eliminate the friction. It helps if you're winning, and then you can know if you're doing a good job. You can say, hey, you did a great job nailing the big part of this chorus. It felt great, and everybody felt like they could sing along. Way to go.
So tell me, what are some things that good sound teams, good worship teams, what do they put in place? Are there definitely some bedrock things that like, all right, we are definitely going to focus on these things as a team and as a leader?
I'd say the first thing is that making sure that the vocals have the top priority in the mix. I have a saying, nobody leaves church humming the kick drum. And while I love a good thumping kick drum that rattles my chest, not everybody loves that, but nobody can hum that. Nobody can remember that during the week. And so the theology that we work to put into our songs and our hymns, we want that to be what people remember. The other parts that are, critical for making it really work together is having a great way to evaluate how things sound, because the worship leader, who probably has the most tuned ear to that, unless there's an audio pro there or somebody with a whole lot of experience, the worship leader is up on stage and the backside of every PA I've listened to sounds terrible, right? So it's kind of like Leonardo da Vinci is sitting there painting the Mona Lisa, and she's like, is my nose really like that? But she's looking from the back of the canvas, right? So it's really difficult to evaluate clearly what it's like from on stage. Now, some worship leaders I've run sound for have an uncanny ability to actually accurately do this. So I'm not saying it's impossible, but it gets much easier if you can have an evaluation method that's either a third party, or if you can record either the output of the mix or the multi-tracks and play them back between, say, sound check and the service, just so that the worship leader can be out in the room experiencing it like everybody else experiences it, and really hear what it's like. That can go miles for making sure that it sounds good and that expectations are being met, because it can feel really disconcerting. And especially as a worship leader, if you're on stage and you're unsure of if it sounds good out in the room, it can really at least make you question your confidence to be able to lead well. When you know that it sounds the way that it should, it just becomes one less thing that you have to worry about while you're leading as a worship leader. So virtual sound check is awesome. Having a trusted set of ears. Maybe there's somebody that's not on the worship team that week, but they have listened to music critically. They know how things should sound and how they should be balanced well. Maybe that person is kind of the designated mix checker, or they can give like a course correction in the middle of the service. You don't want to trust just anybody that comes up to the sound booth and thinks that their opinion is, more important than everyone else's. You need that trusted person that can say, yeah, this is a little bit too much, or, hey, I'm missing these background vocals in this part. That's really important. Let's make sure that we hit that for, either during the service or next service.
What have you seen between the tension or the collaboration, both? How do the sound team and the worship team, what are some things that cause friction, and what are some things that we can do to maybe alleviate and work together better?
The whole idea of the sound tech is the servant of the vision for the worship leader. Really helps when you're trying to eliminate those places of friction, right? So having the idea going into it that I'm trying to figure out as a sound tech what it is that they want to lead well, and then as the band, them also saying, hey, we're also on that vision. So let's say your drummer is playing too loud, which is a common occurrence. I know a lot of drum booths have become more popular, and that's a good thing. Yeah. But there's still a lot of churches where the drums can be too loud if the drummer digs in too much. So having that place to have that conversation where the sound tech has been given delegated authority by the worship leader to say, hey, can you back off a little bit on the cymbals for this part of the song? It makes it hard to get the vocals out in front. Having those methods of communication where, the sound tech can actually get in the in-ear monitors and talk into a microphone rather than having to yell from in the sound booth.
Right.
That goes a long way to making sure that we're reducing friction and drama through the way that we're communicating, and that we've been given the appropriate authority that, the worship leader says, hey, if you're digging in too much, I've told the sound tech to come have a conversation with you just to make that correction. So there's clear lines of communication. It's coming from the worship leader and saying, this is how we're going to communicate with each other. And then, making it so that nobody's yelling, because anytime there's a correction and somebody's yelling, even if they've got the right spirit, then it just increases the drama level, and nobody wants that.
Yeah, good. All right. Tell me about some of the uphill battle that audio techs are facing. Here's what I mean. a lot of audio techs are not the person that's fully in charge, whether that's they're not the worship leader or they're not the executive pastor, or they might be a volunteer that's not on staff. So tell me kind of the uphill battle that some audio techs are facing.
Yeah. A lot of sound techs are people that will fix it at any cost. So, if something's broken and not working, or suddenly there's something that we're going to add a string quartet for this Sunday and it's Saturday night at 9 p.m., right? A lot of times the sound tech will bear the brunt of that, will push through, will make sure that it happens, but that might still be hiding the problem of proper communication, or do we have the resources to do what we need to do? So being influential when you don't have authority is critical for church sound techs, whether you're a volunteer or the technical director, and maybe you don't have budget authority to buy the next new thing that you want. You really have to tie it to the vision that we talked about earlier, right? So if you're a tech director or the lead sound volunteer, and you're noticing that there's a lot of problems with wireless mics every week, you have dropouts with your wireless system, it's creating a distraction, and you fix it and you get it up and running again. Often to the leadership team, they're like, okay, we got that fixed. It's not a problem right now, so it's probably going to be good, right? But as the sound tech, you can go to the leadership team and say, hey, we want to make this church a great place to serve that's low stress, that's easy for people to jump on without having to jump through a lot of hoops, or have a stressful environment. So can we figure out a way that we can alleviate this pressure that we're feeling with these wireless mic dropouts? That conversation is going to go a lot better than you coming up to the lead pastor and saying, hey, I got a quote for these new wireless mics. Let's drop 10 grand.
Right.
I can let you guys decide which one of those conversations is going to go better. Right.
Yeah.
So when you tie the vision of what you're doing, which is, again, that's why we start with vision. When you can tie what you need and solving the problems that you're solving with, your vision for eliminating distractions, for your vision for making it a place where people can come and sing and not think about the sound system. Maybe that means moving your sound booth forward so that it's not on the back wall and the sound tech can hear what everybody else hears, right? Those have to start as a vision conversation before they can go to the execution conversation. So as sound techs, a lot of times we just want to do it. We want to get it done and we want to move on to the next thing. But if we go the slow route, if we take the time to build the consensus with the rest of the team, to involve them in helping to make a great decision, there might be things that you're not thinking about as a sound tech that maybe the executive pastor has a solution for. And so maybe you could save that, big chunk of money that you were going to use and use it on something else and come up with a different solution. You can do that when you're trying to be influential rather than just say, I'm in authority over the sound stuff and we need this and
right.
I need it right now, or I'm quitting. That would be a terrible way to go about it.
Right.
But that's kind of the underlying feeling that we have a lot of times when we're approaching how to solve problems.
So you mentioned vision. What are some vision pieces that the volunteers need to be able to express back to you or to express to other folks? What do they need to make sure that they catch and be able to repeat? Yeah.
It's important to know who you're serving as a church, right? So the church that's been established for, 50, 60 years and has a higher median age of people that are attending, knowing who you're serving and their demographics, right? Their personal preferences is important. So there's a church not too far from here that I help out, training their sound techs. And their max dBSPL is like 82 A-weighted, which is relatively quiet compared to other churches. Mm-hmm. But that's what their congregation needs, right? That's who they are. And knowing that, and, compared to another brand new congregation that's down the street. They've got moving lights, they've got a video wall, they've got all this stuff, and they're attracting a lot of younger people, and they're closer to a college campus. So knowing that the vision of we are trying to serve, this community, or we've got a multicultural or multi-generational community. So we're trying to accommodate two different groups of people and kind of split the difference between what either one of them would like on their own. Having that idea of this is who we're serving and this is what we're doing, that answers and helps us fill in the gaps for a lot of the other questions that we're asking for. What should our mix sound like, right? So some of the attributes for that are like the engagement type, right? Mm-hmm. Is this service or is this mix more contemplative? Do we want people to think about the word, or maybe it's a special service for Easter and you're thinking about the word, you're contemplating the passion of the Christ. That music level might be at a different way to engage people than if you're trying to get people to participate, if you're trying to get them to sing along, if you're having a worship night where you've got extended worship time, maybe you can shift it that way. But if you know what the goal is for how people are going to participate, you're going to be able to shift your mix to be able to meet those expectations, right? That kind of goes into like also the presentation level, right? So do people want to be immersed in the music, or do they want to kind of observe it as like, people are up there leading and singing and I'm out here singing, but the music doesn't surround me, right? You're going to have your mix levels and arrange your instruments and vocals in a different way for those different types of scenarios. Another way to think about it is, do you hear yourself singing, right? So some churches, you want to be able to hear yourself sing when you're out in the seats, where other churches, it's kind of related to the being immersed in the music. They want people to be able to sing loud and worship God from their heart without fear of being found out by the people around them if maybe their voice isn't awesome, right? So we crank the music up loud so that people can't hear themselves, or they can't be heard by the people around them singing. Those are decisions you have to make as a leadership team, and that just puts guidelines and boundaries around it in places where we normally just intuit these things, right? We kind of have an idea of those boundaries, but when you make it clear, it makes those course corrections a lot easier.
Tell me about how you build your team and make sure that everybody's in the right place. So let's walk into a Sunday, what are some of the positions that you need on your audio team?
Yeah. So audio is broken up into different roles because it covers a diverse set of skills, right? There are people who are great at mixing music. They understand the way that the instruments should balance together, the way that the different instruments need to move in relationship to one another in different parts of the song. That's more of the musical mixing side of audio. Then there's also the technical side of audio, where you're having to interface different pieces of gear. You're trying to optimize levels. You're trying to get the speaker system to be as transparent as possible. And that can get really, really nerdy. And that's a different skill set than maybe the musical mixer kind of person. And then the third type of person is somebody almost like a stagehand, where they're there, or the role is to make sure that everything's set up, that everything is in the right place, that you're prepared with all the headphone extension cables and everybody's spot is set up and ready to go, so that when the band arrives, things go smoothly for sound check. So not everybody is going to excel in all three of those roles. It's probably going to be rare for somebody that's a weekend warrior that has a day job and a family to really thrive in all of those. And even professionals need to know where they lean, right? How do they lean in their skills? For me, I'm a little bit more of a musical mixer than my technical skills for setting up, PAs and sound system, but I can do those things, right? So knowing where you are in that spectrum, where your strong points and your weak points are, can either help you stay in the role that you're strong at. Like you might not teach your electric guitar player that's great at mixing how to do, speaker system optimization. You might just not even go there. But also knowing that, your tech person that's great at setting up, that's great at getting the gear working, needs to learn how to mix musically, right? When the when the band comes in, when it's just been piano and vocals, how does that need to feel, right? Those are other things that you need to identify as training opportunities for your team.
So this might get too technical for some. You mentioned dB levels earlier. What is a good dB level, or how loud should my audio be in the room? How do you measure that depending on the church and their style, that sort of thing?
Yeah. So the tool that we use for measuring audio levels as a sound pressure level is called a dB SPL meter. It stands for sound pressure level. And that puts a certain amount of like actual acoustic energy into an electrical form, and we can measure it and it stays consistent, right? Our ears will actually adjust to different audio levels automatically. So when we've been listening to something loud for a long time, maybe you've been mowing your lawn or you're driving down the road and it's raining and you got the windshield wipers going, your ears will adjust so that things sound normal at that level, right? If the loudest thing that you've heard that day is your shower, your ears are going to be a little more sensitive. So the dB SPL meter or SPL meter makes it so that we've got an objective measurement for how loud it is. So there's two things you need to make sure that you've got set on your SPL meter to get a better idea of how things are working. The first one is your weighting curve, right? Music and audio has more low frequency energy than normal speech levels. So if we have our dB SPL meter on A weighted, it ignores more of those low frequencies to operate more like our ear operates, rather than the absolute intensity that's coming from that sound system. So we want to be on A weighted, and we want to set our response to slow, because our ears don't just have differences in the way that they perceive frequencies at different levels, but we also perceive transients or things that are more percussive differently than, a quick SPL meter would be. So if you've got it on fast, your drums are going to pump up that level really high because they have a lot of transient energy. If you have it set on slow, it's going to operate a little bit more like your ears do, and you're going to get a more accurate reading. The problem is that it doesn't take into account as well as we'd like that frequency sensitivity that our ears have. So you could have a mix that's very harsh and reading low on the dB SPL meter, but it doesn't feel good and it feels loud, right? So that can be a real problem for saying, well, we're under the levels, these are okay, but it doesn't feel right. So, or you could have a great sounding mix that you're pushing up at 100 dB SPL and it doesn't feel loud because it's very polished. There's no single frequencies that are out of place.
Right.
And then also, if you only stay at loud levels for a moment, that can be very helpful. The way that I teach churches and worship leaders to kind of set those parameters is to play recorded music and turn it up and walk around in the room to kind of get an idea of, okay, this is about as loud as we need to go for our max moments, right? So play the chorus of a song so that it's got a big instrumentation. And feel how it feels in the room, and then take a note of, okay, that's what it sounds like at 85 dB SPL at the sound booth. That's as far as we need to go for our big moments. And then also knowing that we need to know about how quiet we can go. Speaker systems can be a little bit noisy, especially if they're less expensive. Air conditioning systems can create noise. We need to know, what's the quietest we can go where people can still hear and understand and it's intelligible? Because so having both of those guidelines with your SPL meter just helps you get out of the console fog, right?
Good.
When I have this thing, it's kind of like the fog of war. When you're not behind the audio desk and you don't have all the knobs in front of you, you know exactly what needs to change. And you're like, oh, of course, just walk over there and change this on the snare drum and everything will be fine.
Right.
When you get all the controls in front of you and finally you're the one pushing up the fader from quiet, or you pull down the walk-in music and you push up the fader, all of a sudden you're like, should it be this loud, or how loud should it be right now? My maximum's 85. Should I push my speaking mics up to 85? That feels too loud, but they said this was the limit. So So having those kind of parameters, those guidelines that kind of gets you out of the, oh no, what do I do now that I'm behind the controls, that can be really helpful, both for the music part of the service and for teaching. If you have an idea of what's comfortable for people to listen to, you can look at that and kind of gauge what it should be like with your SPL meter.
So I know that you're, and we all should be big on raising up leaders and having volunteers in spots. Let's say, let's put a scenario where you as the staff member are training up someone to run the mix. How do you not micromanage their mix so much where you're constantly over the shoulder? Do this. How do you, what are some best ways to train them up where you're not micromanaging them so much?
Yeah, I think the way that I like to train people is to bring them on and say, hey, you shadow me, and I'm going to talk you through what I'm doing. And then the next time you come and get trained, or after a few times, depending on how quick of a learner they are, maybe they have their hands on the console, but you're telling them what to do. You're basically mixing through them and pointing out the things that you're observing and responding to so that they can get an idea of why you're making changes, not just what changes you're making, and then, how to do it. So, making sure that they are clued in to bridge that gap between their ear, their brain, and then what's on the console, teaching them to do that as they're getting trained, right? If you're having to come up and micromanage, that probably means that you didn't spend enough time in training, both not just how to do the stuff, but why and what you're listening for. So when you start at that place, it gets a lot easier. You don't have to look over their shoulder all the time. If you've spent enough proper time looking over their shoulder and helping them make great decisions about the mix. So being less particular about making sure that everybody's methods are uniform and making sure that everybody's results and outputs are uniform helps eliminate the micromanagement. And then also having the trust built within the relationship of being able to identify the values and the vision and saying, hey, this value of ours isn't being met right now. Let's take a look at some of your methods and see if one of them might be tripping you up and keeping you from getting the vocals out in front or keeping the energy level under, 88 dB SPL. Let's look at the way that you're doing it. That way you're trying to do the least amount of meddling in somebody else's mix.
Yeah.
Giving them the autonomy to do it the way that they want it, but also, getting those end results out of it as well.
All right, last question for you before I play a little game with you. So,
all right,
tell me about evaluating post-service. What are some things that you are sitting down with your volunteers, your team, whether that's after the service on Sunday or throughout the week? What are you evaluating and how are you course correcting?
Yeah, so I picked this up from Navy SEALs, so I can't take credit for it. But the kind of post-op questionnaire, you go through 4 questions. It's what was our mission? What did we set out to do? And week to week as a church sound team, you know what you set out to do. But that shouldn't change much. What went well? And then what are we going to do again? And then say what didn't go well, and what are we not going to do again? I'm not going to stick my finger in an outlet again because that didn't go well, right? We had some pain point there, but we don't often remember the things after the church service after we corrected it. So saying what could have gone better. And then the final question is, do we have all the resources that we need in order to do what our mission was? I know for me, after church, I'm wanting to get the kids in the car. I'm wanting to go home. I'm wanting to get lunch. There's a lot of pressure to move on quickly. But when your brain is fresh, you can remember the things that didn't go really well. For instance, I volunteer at my church on the sound team once a month. And last time I ran sound, we had 3 singers, and on one song, each one of them took lead at a different section. And I totally missed when there was a female leading, male leading, and another female leading. It went from the first female to the male for the bridge, and then it switched, and there was an upper part. The third singer was singing that other part. and I totally missed it. So I'm like trying to push up one singer, but only getting like airy harmony parts. And I was confused by that. If I don't have that conversation about, hey, next time, let's make sure if there's any changes between who's leading in a particular song, let's make sure that those are rehashed at least before sound check or right before the service, kind of those one more thing, don't forget this. If I would have said that right after the service, we would have been it would have been easier to remember it and get it, in that rotation of this is what we do. If you just have those conversations early so they don't get forgotten about, they don't get, you're not going on to the next service and the next week, and then you forget to make those changes that are going to make your team more effective.
Yeah, good. Man, this is such great stuff. I think I've enjoyed kind of going back to a beginner level a little bit just to give people an overview of sound teams and audio in a worship experience, and then how to build your audio tech team. So thank you for that, man. All right. Can I hit you with some fast trivia?
Let's do it.
All right, here we go. All right, number one, these are going to be random, so hang tight. All right,
okay.
Number one, what is your favorite sound? Your favorite sound?
The bass guitar.
Okay. All right, number two, what is your biggest pet peeve when it comes to an audio mix in a church? What makes you cringe when you're not on the board?
When the harmony vocal is louder than the melody.
Okay. Number three, what characteristic do you value or admire most in the people who serve on your team?
Their humility and their willingness to learn and serve and grow.
What artists are on your Spotify playlist right now?
Corey Wong.
Okay. All right. Last question. What is something in the church today that really encourages you about the path forward or in the years to come?
I see so many churches abandoning tribalism and seeing the symphony of the church at large and everybody playing their own role within a city. So I see a lot of that between all the churches that I'm working with and even the churches here in town. There's a lot of synergy, and I don't think that was always the case. I think there used to be a lot of us versus them and competing for attendees. And I don't see that, at least in my neck of the woods.
I wonder if that has something to do with maybe the pandemic. Like, hey, we're in this together. We there's no time to waste. Let's get to the battlefield, kind of thing. Do you think that has anything to do with it?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think another part is just seeing, maturing as the body of believers and knowing who everybody's strengths are.
Yeah.
Knowing that, my church, we're serving young families. Another church down the road, they've got a great youth group. And so their youth group is kind of driving their church growth. And so there's all the different things that you do well. And when you know who you are, you can double down and not have to try to be like the church down the street, or not have to try to be the big church that you watch online, on YouTube.
Right.
I'm thankful for all that, but I feel like churches are coming into their identity as this is who we're called to serve, and we're happy to stay in that niche and do what God's called us to do.
Good. Well, man, thank you for your time today. Tell us how we can follow your YouTube channel and stay in touch with what you're doing.
Yeah, so the YouTube channel is Attaway Audio. Attaway is with 2 T's. And then on my website at attawayaudio.com, you can find more resources there. I've got a free guide, How to Lead Your Church Sound Team. It goes through all this in detail. There's a worksheet that you can fill out for the different parts where you can sit down with your leadership team. You can sit down with your sound tech volunteers and really go through as a team, defining these parameters and figuring out what they are for your church so that you can really know when the mix is on point.
Yeah. James, thank you so much, man. Really appreciate your time today.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Hey guys, Grant Murphy here from the 1230 team. This week, we want to give you an amazing coupon code for a free mini movie from our ready-made media library. I want you to go to 1230.media and click the Ready Made tab and choose Mini Movies. There you can choose any mini movie in our library. We even given you more search capability to search for service opener videos quickly. At checkout, use the code MSHMM1, MSHMM1 in the promo code box to make that video completely free. We're on a mission to help you make Sunday happen. We pray that this will help you do that.
The show notes for this episode are available now at makingsundayhappen.com.
Hey guys, next week on the podcast, I will welcome two pastors, Jason Bowling and Gerald Faulkner. We're going to be talking about the church in the metaverse. These are two pastors who have both started to use virtual reality experiences in their church. Jason has been using it for longer than Gerald. Gerald is brand new. He's just starting out with his church doing VR. So I wanted to kind of have both of these pastors, Jason, who's been doing it for a while, Jared, who just started, in looking at virtual reality in the church world and doing virtual reality worship experiences. I'll be talking with both of these pastors about how they are implementing VR in their church. Very interesting episode next week. Well, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel or follow us on social media if you would, and go out there and create some incredible worship experiences at your church this weekend. I'll catch you next week.
Making Sunday Happen is a production of the ministry of 1230 Media. For show notes, archive episodes, and more free resources for your church, visit makingsundayhappen.com.